So we know that many progressive societies around the world invest in young children. It's increasingly being seen as one of the smartest investments a country can make. Yet many children still lack access to quality learning due to funding, infrastructure issues, regulatory challenges, etc. But in South Africa, proposed changes to the Children's Amendment Bill is aiming to make it easier for early childhood development or ECD centers, particularly in underserved and under resourced communities, to register and access support while being able to maintain child protection standards. And that's exactly what I'd like us to interrogate in this conversation and really look at, legislation, but not legislation alone. What are the other things that form part of building tools to make sure that we get success when it comes to these particular amendments? On the line with me to have a conversation on children, families, and the future of early learning is Pascale Bakos, who's head of communications at Afrika Tikkun Bambanani. Welcome, Pascale. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to chat with you today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm a huge fan of the work of Africa Tikkun. I think you definitely have a finger on the pulse in terms of, just developing people of South Africa and especially the children so that we can grow and become a better society. But let's talk about the Children's Amendment Bill. I beg your pardon. As we understand it, it seeks to make it easier for more ECD centers in the country to operate legally. So perhaps you can give us an understanding as to what does it tell us about the barriers that have kept so many of these particular centers, especially in disadvantaged communities, to be able to operate outside of a formal system?
Absolutely. I think what is important to remember is a lot of these ECDs where learning is taking place are not your typical classrooms. Yes, when we picture a classroom, we picture the desks and the chairs and the beautiful posters on the wall. But unfortunately, that isn't the reality for many centers in South Africa. There are some centers being run out of maybe churches
Mm-hmm.
or garages or someone's garden. And those centers are still places of safety for children whose parents are not teaching them. Perhaps their parents are out at work. And it is so important that we acknowledge the importance of these centers for childhood development and education. And essentially, this bill removes some of the red tape that has been there, stopping these centers from being recognized and registered. And it sort of says to these centers, we see you, you are doing good work. We
Mm-hmm.
want to make it easier for you to register, and we acknowledge the beautiful work that you are doing for children.
Okay. And then I think there's a challenge that we need to talk about because we're not just talking about expanding access to early learning centers, if you will. We're also looking at being able to increase or improve, rather, the quality of care and learning that the children receive. How are we going to be able to strike the balance? Just looking at perhaps this proposed change to the bill.
So I think it's important that, as you said, we look at the quality of what children are learning. And that is where Afrika Tikkun Bambanani comes in. We do work on curriculum development. We do work on teacher and practitioner training.
Mm-hmm.
We emphasize that these educators are not babysitters. They are qualified teachers who are doing wonderful work. And I think the second we acknowledge that the first 1,000 days of a child's life are the most important, and that their education in those first 1,000 days is absolutely important for their future. Second, we acknowledge that then children can progress and our society can progress. In terms of the bill itself, the bill doesn't talk about curriculum development or
Mm-hmm.
the milestones that these children need to reach, but we there are multiple organizations and many people in society who do know and have researched and acknowledge the importance of curriculum development in this space. It is so important that we get those literacy and numeracy skills correct from early childhood development, because the child's entire academic career is reliant on those first few years. Because the research shows that learners who struggle in numeracy and literacy between the ages of 3 and 5 are more likely to struggle in school, and then that has a ripple effects and impacts their ability to work and create a career, as we know. So investing in this early curriculum, investing in this early childhood development has ripple effects throughout time.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you asked about curriculum development, because I know it doesn't come up in this bill specifically. But I think once this bill looks at child protection very importantly, and it does look at regulation of these ECD centers. But we must remember that part of protecting a child, part of ECD development, is curriculum development and what the learners are learning.
Okay, very important. 18 minutes into 10 a.m. in Central African time. We're looking at the legislative conversation around the proposed changes to the Children's Amendment Bill and what it aims to do in terms of really giving access and equal opportunity to underserved communities. But I think what's so critical about just some of the things that Pascale is bringing into this conversation is beyond legislation. How are we making access to good quality ECD centers a reality and not just a privilege? Actually, that's a question. She'll answer it after the break.
Este é o Caleidoscópio de Canal África, com Remo Samo e João Yabalá.
E a recente aprovação da nova lei de combate à disseminação de informações falsas na Guiné-Bissau abriu um intenso debate público sobre os limites entre o combate à desinformação e a salvaguarda da liberdade de expressão. O diploma aprovado pelo Conselho Nacional de Transição pretende reforçar o combate ao cibercrime, às burlas digitais e à propagação de conteúdos falsos nas redes sociais, prevendo inclusive penas agravadas para casos com dimensão internacional. Nesta entrevista com António Nhanga, bastonário da Ordem dos Jornalistas da Guiné-Bissau, analisámos as implicações políticas, sociais e mediáticas da nova legislação.
É um pretexto que o comando militar arranjou para poder silenciar a imprensa ou silenciar as vozes mais críticas que pode haver no país. Essa que é a grande verdade sobre esse assunto. Não é questão de liberdade ou é questão de combater a fake news, mas é a forma de silenciar as vozes críticas que existem no país, quer na imprensa, quer nas redes sociais.
De segunda a sexta-feira, das 20 às 21 horas locais, este é o Caleidoscópio de Canal África.
Not fully figured out, not fully funded, but fully unstoppable. Celebrating the youth on Channel Africa, the African perspective. Channel Africa and you have got something in common. The thirst for knowledge. The African child. On the channel.
21 minutes into 10 a.m. in Central African time. Thank you very much for staying with us here on The Journal as we continue to get an understanding of the Children's Amendment Bill. We understand that there are proposed changes to this particular bill, and these changes are aimed to make it easier for early child development centers, particularly those in under-resourced communities, to register and access support while also maintaining child protection standards. Very, very important. In conversation with Pascale Bakos in her capacity as Head of Communications at Afrika Tikkun. I want to go back to my thoughts just before we went to break, Pascale, in terms of going beyond legislative reform in this particular dialogue. What needs to happen to make sure that ECD becomes a reality for most centers, if not all of them? I mean, ideally, we want all of them to be covered in this manner so that we can move beyond it being a privilege to just a select few in our societies.
I think what's important here is that we live in a country with the constitution that is renowned all over the world for being inclusive, for looking at diversity, and for looking at very important basic human rights. And one of these human rights is the right to an education. And we so often forget that education, whether it's learning to count from 1 to 5 at the age of 4, or whether it's learning a complex math sum at the age of 18, it is a basic human right. It is not a luxury, it is not a privilege. And it is most unfortunate that in some societies and in some areas, it is seen as a privilege because it is not a basic human right. So let us go back to the Constitution of South Africa. Let us remind ourselves that this is a basic human right. And how do we make this basic human right possible for young learners? And I think that it involves not just government. We can't just point fingers at government. We certainly can't just blame the private sector or NGOs who are doing wonderful work. We have to work together. I think that there is a huge issue of unemployment, which sheds light on the fact that this isn't just an issue in one or two small areas. It is a huge issue throughout the nation that has to be dealt with. We cannot treat ECD as a privilege. We have to realize that, as I said earlier, these practitioners are not babysitters, they are teachers. We have to realize that investing in a child at a young age of age 3 to 5 who's just learning to read and write is a long-term investment in terms of the economy of South Africa, because we are looking at a youngster that will one day become an entrepreneur and contribute to our GDP and make our nation more powerful. And when we see a child, unfortunately, a lot of the time, we don't see someone as important as perhaps an older individual going into university or entering the workforce, because we are not thinking long term. And the second we A, think long term, and B, look at the Constitution of South Africa, it becomes abundantly clear that these education centers should not be a privilege, should not be a rarity. They should be part of a child's everyday life from the age of 3.
Right. A lot of important things coming through in your response, Pascale, especially when we look at looking at a child as an investment for our future, in our society. Because if we build the child, I mean, as a consequence, we really are going to benefit as a country on many levels. But I'm thinking about your response and the important things that you're bringing up in terms of, and the working together that you're mentioning, that it's not just a government problem, but we've all got to hold hands and really tackle it. What we are seeing is that many ECD centers are not only under-resourced, but they struggle to meet registration requirements, is what we're seeing here. So do these reforms, as we note them, go beyond, just addressing the surface problems and really getting to the nitty-gritties of what the challenges are on the ground?
Yeah, so I think, as you mentioned, what is nice about this amendment bill is it removes all of the regulations that these informal ECD centers had to adhere to and simply could not adhere to. And it is almost unfair to expect an ECD center being run out of the garage of someone's home to adhere to the same requirements as a well-funded private ECD in a well-resourced urban area. It is just ludicrous that we expect that. So the fact that this amendment bill has come out is so important because, number one, it gets rid of all of these regulations while still protecting the child. And the reason I say that is we can very easily say, okay, it's easier for these ECD centers to become registered, red tapes removed. We must remember that that does not mean that any unsafe building that is structurally unsound or unsafe for a child is allowed to operate as an ECD center. We are not saying that. We are just looking at reasonableness, and it is the terms and conditions essentially are more reasonable, and it is easier for these ECD centers to become registered. So they don't have to adhere to these very strict, unreasonable infrastructure, for example, rules and regulations. However, the protection of the child is still considered. The child cannot learn in an environment that is not sanitary, where there is risk of a roof falling, for example. So we have to be careful when we say that we've gotten rid of all of these regulations, because we've still adhered to the protection of the child. And let's be
Yeah.
honest, this bill and the amendments to the bill focus on the best interests of the child first and foremost. And I like that you say that it's not just looking at the surface, and it's really getting into the nitty gritty. Because if we really read this bill, I know it has a lot of legal jargon that people may skim past, and unfortunately there aren't very many nice YouTube summaries or nice summaries available online. So you really need to read through this bill and do your own research, and you'll see that they look at everything about the child. And as South Africans, as people who work with children, we are very proud of this bill that's been put forward. They even look at, for example, the rights of unmarried fathers. They look at orphans and protecting and looking after children and their rights in the legal sense. So this bill really uncovers all of these deep socioeconomic and other social issues that children are facing on a day-to-day basis. In the ECD space, yes, but also in terms of their own protection. So the bill does absolutely a lot more than look at the issue on a surface level. It really digs deep into the issues that children are facing in South Africa.
This is incredibly important. You've just added another layer of really just looking at the entire document. And it's not a small document by any stretch of the imagination, but I think perhaps an interrogation of the preamble of the Children's Amendment Bill and what it outlines and the importance of it is another layer that we've got to look at who can actually assist in getting people to understand so that we can improve access to services. But as we wrap up our conversation, just in a few seconds, if you can, Pascale, I'd appreciate understanding from Afrika Tikkun's experience, working with children and families, just the long-term benefits of what we've just discussed.
So, with working with children and families at Afrika Tikkun Bambanani, it's become so clear to me that we need to have empathy, and that we really need to use our hearts in education more, and we need to really put our all into educating these young minds, because I promise you, the our time that you see when you empower a young child is just absolutely inspirational. Those first 1,000 days are the most important days, the most important years of a child's life. And I really encourage everyone to get in touch with Afrika Tikkun Bambanani, whether you're a teacher or a parent, to really see how you can help in the work that we do with these young minds. And thank you for your time. We really appreciate platforms like this that shed light on such important issues in our country.
Absolutely. Anytime, this is home. This is actually what we are meant to do. Public service in communications is very important to us. Pascale, thank you very much. All the best with the work, and let's catch up again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pascale Bakos, Head of Communications at Afrika Tikkun Bambanani. Such an important conversation. In fact, if you work in the legal fraternity and are able to get into spaces where you can actually explain the Children's Amendment Bill, explain to people in a language that they understand, that would be a great service. Really, it would. It's 10:30. Let's check in with the latest in sports with Figile Lengwati.
Sports.